Don't forget that you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. Jeff, if I was to join our Patreon, tell me, what am I going to get?
Well, first of all, you're going to have that warm feeling inside of supporting a show that you love. But
The warm,
also,
fuzzy feelings. Who doesn't want that?
in addition to that, because if that wasn't enough, but wait, there's more. We'll also give you access to clips, early clips from shows that aren't out yet, bonus clips of content that you wouldn't get to hear otherwise. We'll give you updates on stories we've covered. We'll even send you some swag just as a thank you. Maybe we'll even call out your name as a thank you on this show. All of that and maybe more. Join and find out.
When a 19-year-old young woman's post on social media about getting trafficked by a gang of Asian men goes viral, things quickly spin out of hand.
There are racist attacks on Asian men and businesses in her hometown in coastal England.
But what if she made it all up? What if she's the criminal in this story?
It's time to preview Unreliable Witness on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee. And in this episode, we'll introduce you to Unreliable Witness, a podcast from Sky News.
After that, we'll tackle a true crime question of the week.
If you haven't listened to Unreliable Witness, that's great. On our preview episodes, like this one, we introduce you to a new podcast. We only discuss the first episode. No spoilers for what's to come. You'll also find a link to Unreliable Witness in our show notes.
In our next episode, we're going to discuss the whole series, but right now, we just want to decide if this is a crime that's worth your time. Okay, Dee, before we get to this crime, let's hop in the time machine. This crime happened on May 20th, 2020.
Too many 20s going on there. It feels like there might have been bad vibes happening with all those 20s.
Yeah, I mean, this was a dark time for the world, May of 2020. Yeah, this will be relevant to the story we get to. And I tried to look up things. I tried to look up what movies were popular in the United States, and basically there were no movies because no one was going to the movies. And then I looked up. I don't know. I looked up a couple of news stories, and they're not great.
No.
As you might imagine. I mean, just for the sake of helping people understand exactly where we were, if you don't remember May 20th of 2020.
I mean, some people have blocked it out.
Sure, I wish I could. So the day before, May 19th, there was a sad or happy, depending on how you look at it, environmental story that came out that greenhouse gas emissions dropped 17% worldwide in April of 2020. Maybe because no one was driving their cars anywhere. So
sad.
And then also just to kind of place this in time, I think this will come up later. I don't know if this will ever be referenced in the podcast we listen to, but it seems sort of tangentially relevant. 5 days after this crime. So this crime was on May 20th. On May 25th, that was the day George Floyd was murdered by police officers in Minneapolis. So that's same week, basically, as this crime.
I did read an article that there was 2 peaceful protests held in Dublin in reaction to George Floyd's murder, which I was like, go on the Irish. You're not even over there and you're supporting or, getting your voices heard.
I did, on a lighter note, because I was desperate for a lighter note, go on TripAdvisor and look up our location. So our location here is on the coast of England, on the west coast of England, north of Liverpool, in a place that I'd never heard of called Barrow-in-Furness. Do you have any familiarity with this place?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I want to know what's there to do if you go there. So the top 2 places to go to visit when you're there. So next time you're there. Number 1 is Furness Abbey, which is from the 12th century, and it was a favorite spot for William Wordsworth. So yeah, I went down a whole rabbit hole of reading about the Abbey. None of those facts I'm ready to share with you now. The second thing.
I'm so sad.
So this is a coastal town in England, and so they had a lot of shipbuilding. So there's a dock museum.
Mm-hmm.
So a museum about docks. And I didn't know what that was, if it was what it sounds like. Turns out it is very much what it sounds like.
Yep.
And I was reading through the reviews on TripAdvisor, and there was a review from a guy named Simon G. from Sheffield, whose review was, This is from April of 2013. So this is an older review, but I thought it was valuable and I wanted to share in case you're ever in this area and want to go to the Dock Museum. He said, arriving on foot with a rucksack, I found there was nowhere to leave the bag while I looked around. The staff were less than helpful, so I left.
But where did he go? Did Simon G not tell us?
That's a 1-star review. Maybe he went to the Abbey.
Maybe you went to, what was the pub? Mulligan's?
Manhattan's.
Manhattan,
Yeah,
with the American flag outside it.
Yeah. All right. That, I guess, is our time machine.
That is our time machine.
Okay.
Much like the year and the time that was in it. Pretty sad and pathetic.
Dee, where were you in May of 2020 in the world?
Dublin. We were just the month before we were supposed to move over to California.
What do you think? Would it have been better to be in California or Dublin?
For the lockdown?
Yeah.
I think I would have been too stressed out to be here and be away from my family, because at least I got to wave at them through the window. But it probably would have been more fun. The winter of the lockdown during the winter was tough because it was real dark and wet. Couldn't go anywhere. 2 young kids. It's very sad.
Yeah, I don't know. There's things about that time, that spring and summer, there's obviously a lot of horrible, sad things. I'm trying to think of some positive things.
You guys had really bad wildfires. You couldn't even go outside.
That was in the summer and fall. Yeah, there's some famous pictures from like September of the orange sky over San Francisco where it was really bad. But in May, we were just basically like, you weren't supposed to go more than 5 or 10 miles from your home. Like, it was very like strict Bay Area lockdown. I do remember at one point we broke the rules because I was just going stir crazy. Like, I was so just like tired of we lived in a very small apartment and it was 4 of us and 2 teenage boys. And at one point I was just like, I got to go see the ocean. Like, I know we're not supposed to go that far. And like, but there was a weird time where it was like, you didn't know, like, are you going to get pulled over? And are they going to check like where you're from? Because like they were seemingly doing that in some places in California. They didn't. We went to Half Moon Bay. I went and just stood on the beach for a while and just appreciated being out of my town and out of my apartment, and it was glorious. So
I'd imagine.
Yeah, that was somewhere around May, I think. I don't know exactly what day that was. So anyway, all right, should we get to the podcast?
Let's do it. Okay, so about the podcast that we're about to discuss. This is Unreliable Witness. It came out in March of 2024. There are 6 episodes, each about 30 minutes long.
Yeah, and this is, as you mentioned before, put up by Sky News. And this is season 6 of Storycast. The hosts are Jason Farrell. Jason Farrell's like the main host, I think. And then there's Liz Lane, who pops in and out.
Seems to be on the ground a bit.
Yeah. So they're both, I think, Sky News reporters, or they work for both. They both work for Sky News.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, before we jump into our thoughts on this, how about we just give a really quick synopsis of what happens here? Okay, so we're introduced to Ellie Williams, and the very start, we're introduced to her in a courtroom, and she's giving a statement, and it appears she's the victim, but they throw a spanner in the works and say she's actually been brought to court for making up this whole story. Basically, in May of 2020, she posted, was it May of 2020 she posted it?
That was May 20th. That's the date we used for the time machine, May 20th.
In May 2020, May 20th, 2020, she posted a massive social media, massive Facebook post basically saying that she had been in a toxic situation with a group of Asian men where they were abusing her, they were threatening her, they had raped her, they had carved letters into her body. She had a huge amount of physical
she had bruises, she had cuts. She was it's sort of described as a horrific amount of violence evident on her.
And it's noted actually by the host that even after knowing that the story wasn't true, it was really hard to unsee the photographs of Ellie's the physical marks on Ellie.
Yeah.
So she came out with this Facebook post and it ended up going viral. But Ellie lived in a really, really small town with a pretty small basically everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew everything about everyone else.
Yeah.
And there was uproar because she had said a group of Asian men had done this to her. And so protests started. All of this like racist rhetoric started coming out, really violent and really damaging to a lot of people. And it turns out that the whole story was made up. So we hear from her mother, we hear from her sister, we hear from a childhood friend about how innocent, how lovely, how amazing Ellie was. And the story that the media are spinning isn't like, it doesn't describe the girl that they knew or the woman that they knew.
And we also get a little bit of how this didn't come out of nowhere. Like it was a sort of a slow descent into this. Like there were incidents that were stacking up of her disappearing, of her showing up with black eyes or bruises on her arms, things that her coworkers, that her mother, her sister saw, and chalked up to either, you know, injuries she was getting on the job where she worked as like a waitress or like she worked in like a bar. And
I think she was a lounge girl, Jeff.
Yes, I thought of that. Yeah. But, you know, in an environment where she might get like grabbed by the arm or something, and that might leave a bruise, or she might have had an abusive boyfriend. But I think the extent of it wasn't really clear. Like, but it seemed like it was a progression over maybe a series of months or a couple of years where it got worse and worse and worse. But people maybe like observed things, were worried about her, but didn't step in or didn't like know how to help her. Right?
Yeah. So now that we have that background context, let's jump into our feelings. What are your thoughts? Shockingly, I have thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is kind of an odd story. I feel like this has weird parallels to other stories we've covered, but is also kind of its own unique thing.
What parallels are you seeing with other stories?
Well, so for example, I think the thing that I keep coming back to is we've heard stories about women in kind of horrible situations being like groomed by men or being in sort of like these situations of assault or rape, and this is sort of a version of that, right? Where that's the allegation. We know from the start, I mean, that's in the title of the podcast, that it's not true. Like, she's making it up. And I think the thing that I kind of got hung up on throughout this episode was, God, like, everybody comes out of this looking bad. Like, there's just a lot of bad to go around in this. What are your thoughts initially?
Well, you mentioned there that like basically from the title, but also at the very start of the episode, nearly in the intro, they kind of tell you outright that Ellie Williams, isn't in fact the victim. She's in court, and they describe her being in court and giving her testimony, but they say that she's not she's the one being prosecuted.
Yeah, she's the defendant.
Right?
She's the defendant.
I got really confused about my words there. She's in fact the defendant. She's the one that's been brought to court.
Right.
And I was kind of wondering, I think a question I had for you is like, did you forget that as you listened to the rest of the episode? Did you have to keep reminding yourself that she's not the victim here?
That's so funny. I have that actually. I was thinking the same thing. I was going to ask you. I totally did. Like and I don't know why that is, but I kept it. We've talked about this before, where I have this thing where if like I read or like I watch a movie I've seen before, I always think of like Romeo and Juliet. This is my go-to reference for this. If like every time I see a version of Romeo and Juliet, I think, no, this time they're gonna make it. Like they're both gonna survive. You know, she's gonna realize he's not really dead, and she's not gonna kill herself. And spoiler for a 600-year-old play. But, yeah, even though I knew the truth, I really wanted it not to be the truth in a way.
Yeah, the whole time I was listening, and I felt she's so vulnerable. Oh my God, like her poor mother. Can you imagine being a mother of a teenager who's slipping out of your grasp like that? And she's trying her best. She's saying, just come home. At least if you come home, I can alert the police earlier because I'll know if you've gone missing again. So she's not trying to get her fully out. She's trying to be as supportive as she can be without pushing her daughter away. There's so much that's happening here and my heart is breaking. And then I had to nearly slap myself across the face and be like, this, she's not the victim. But also, Jeff, how is she not the victim? I don't see. Like, can you?
This is a weird story. So yeah, maybe we should give a little bit of context. And we don't have a lot of context in this episode.
No.
I think we have more questions than answers in a different, so to step back for a second, I think this first episode, I didn't really feel like was exactly like anything else we've listened to in the way it presents the story. Because to your point, to your question, she's presented sort of sympathetically, but also it's clear she's the villain in this story. She's the villain, but she seems so much like the victim.
But is she the villain, do you think? Or is it that her story wasn't fully accurate? Like, I don't know that they've ever said, like, she is the villain.
So what we
know...
Her
allegations are false. We know that. Yeah, I definitely had to remind myself about that. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Like, do you feel like... Okay, so we know the start.
Yes.
Because this episode is a lot to do with the start. It's about to do with Ellie and like what happened, what led up, or from her point of view and her sister and her mother and the manager at the bar she worked with, their point of view, how this led up. We don't hear from Ellie. We also know the end because at the beginning of episode 1, we hear her defending herself in court.
Right.
But do you think you can figure out the in-between?
I gave this a lot of thought. So I actually approached this podcast differently than other ones we've listened to, just sort of as a factor of how we're recording this. Like, we had a gap before we recorded this. And so I listened to this first episode like a week and a half ago, and then I sat on it and kind of mulled it over and then listened to it again yesterday before we're recording this. And in that time, I'm like, what? Because I had never heard of this. Had you ever heard of this story before? Or was this new to you?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
So they apparently this was big news in England, I guess, at the time, but I wasn't in England in 2020, so I was oblivious to this. But yeah, if I'm filling in the gaps in my head, I'm presuming that, I mean, she's having some type of mental health crisis, right?
Yeah, which especially at this time, quite common, I think, at the beginning of the pandemic. After in Ireland, we were a month and a half into lockdown. Yeah. So, I mean, that in May of 2020, the whole world was in a pretty rough mental state. It was hard for everybody. It was especially hard for teenagers. I think people who are at that point in life where like the social parts of life are so important and they're just cut off from everything. I don't know what it was like for her in this town. I'm just sort of presuming. So I don't know. This is all my conjecture. Maybe we'll learn more. I hope we'll learn more about this as we go on. But yeah, what do you think? Yeah, I just don't know if I can figure it out quite. One of the things that we hear is that she had the word rat carved into her stomach. And we also hear that it turns out that she inflicted these injuries to herself. Mm-hmm. And that just, I don't know, it's just also, it's so bleak.
Well, and to your earlier question about like wanting to kind of believe her and believe what we know to be true isn't true, something that I also kind of struggle with is what she apparently did was to falsely accuse specifically these Asian men, Indian and Pakistani men, of this crime, which led to these sort of blanket racist attacks and riots against this community in this small town. So this overwhelmingly white town where there are a pocket of Asian men who are targeted then for no reason.
Asian families.
Yeah, for no reason other than this girl chose to point the finger at them falsely. So there's this element of racism here that exploded when she did this that makes her so much less sympathetic.
I know, and do you know what I really found hard? I don't know how much you're keeping up with what's happening in England and Belfast at the moment. Basically, there was last week a young man who, I don't know where he originated from. The headlines would say that he was Muslim, went into a Taylor Swift dance class, young girls going to a dance class in camp in summer, and stabbed a number. I think 2 or 3 girls have passed away. Others have had massive injuries. And since that has happened, massive riots have broken out all over England. Like it's chaos. There's travel warnings on going to the UK at the moment because of it. And the same happened in Belfast. I've seen so many stories about asylum seekers and refugees who are being housed in hotels at the moment. Gangs of people going and trying to set alight the hotels, barricading people in and trying to set them alight.
Yeah.
They're
I have heard about this. You're
attacking shops. It's horrendous. It's so bad what's happening at the moment. And not to dismiss at all the absolutely, I can't even bear to think about what the families are going through whose girls were stabbed. But I'm fine. I did find listening to this, and this is just by chance that we ended up choosing this. We chose this a long time ago to listen to. It's by chance that we're listening to it at the same time. I found it really hard to separate my feelings on what's happening in England and in Belfast from what's happening here. The way people straight away are like, if the Asian men are involved, it's all the Asian people, right. All the Asian families, all the Asian men in our community, and going after it as if it's a race thing. That's really hard because I'm seeing so many images and I'm hearing so many stories about what's happening at the moment, and it's just so upsetting, which is like a real woe is me word to use at the moment. Upsetting for me sitting here in California, but it's just all it's a lot, and it makes it hard then to have any sort of sympathy for Ellie, because this isn't a victimless crime. We don't know the rest of the story, and I'm not saying that she's not a victim, especially if she's going through a mental health issue, but she's not portraying a story here about a man who's disappeared into the ether, and we don't know who that man is that has done this to me. But she's saying this entire community, and what's happening then is this big uprising, which I'm using air quotes for, against anyone, like any Asian person within the community, and it seems like such a low blow. It seems like such an easy dig. It seems like such a, I don't know, it really upset me. That tone to it and the aftermath that it came with. And I just can't believe that anyone who puts that story out doesn't understand. I'm not saying that she understands the extent of what happened, and we actually don't know the extent of what happened in her town, but we know it wasn't at all pleasant.
Right.
But I just think if you put a claim against a man in general, things might get bad. But if you put a claim against a minority group, a group of men that are minority, and that people are going to get their goat, it's going to get people's goat, and they're going to go after them.
Right.
It's different, and it's more calculated, which is what it feels like here. Sorry, wow, rant. I always do that.
No, that was rant worthy. I think that deserved the rant. I think this is the most important topic from this episode, but like, where do your kind of sympathies lie, and how is she presented? And I think, because she is this 19-year-old white girl from this rural England coastal town, like, is there an inherent sympathy for her, even though she sparked this horrific response against this whole community? And I think the other thing that we haven't talked about that has been kind of frustrating for me is, okay, so this is presumably a false accusation of rape,
mm-hmm.
which is upsetting
among
in a different
other
way.
things, to be fair, because it's more than that.
But then there's the issue of, what effect does this have on those who are raped and aren't believed, right? Like, this adds kind of fuel to the fire of women making up these stories.
Yeah, it's so damaging for actual victims. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. But also to pile onto that, I mean, specifically, she's talking about like a sort of human trafficking situation, right? Like a grooming,
like a ring, like a more organized and curated kind of thing than like a
Yeah, which also happens, right? Like, this happens to people, to vulnerable people. And again, like, these are people who may not be believed because of stories like this, right? which
Yeah.
is frustrating in a different way.
I have a question that I don't know if I want to ask. I'm going to ask it anyway. A couple of minutes ago, you mentioned how, like, because she's a young white woman living in a rural town, she has, like, sympathy kind of straight away, or inherent sympathy, I think is the way you put it. I don't know. Is it because she's a young woman who might be vulnerable? Is her race a factor here because she uses it? She uses race in her story, or do you think because she's white that's kind of adding to like her more sympathetic figure?
No, I think that's a good question. I think I don't know about the context in England, right? Like, but I can speak as an American, though, and this is something like you and I have talked about. I don't know if we talked about it on this podcast before, but this is certainly something that is a common topic in America about like white women as victims of crimes, violence, sex crimes, things like that, get more attention than women of color.
So kind of similar to Devon Gray in that it was deemed that maybe she didn't get as much sympathy, and the only reason that might have happened was because she was in fact black and other people who got the sympathy were white.
Yeah, so Devon Gray from Blind Plea, I think the victims we talked about in Black Girl Gone, right? Like if those women had been white, those stories would have gotten a different, presumably more significant amount of attention from the police, from the community, from the press.
And so you think maybe, or do you think maybe if Ellie Williams, given like the makeup of the and maybe this is a moot point, but like if she was an Asian girl who's coming out to say that there is a ring of white men, obviously the impact is different because it's not the minority. It's not focusing in on but even if it was an Asian woman who's saying there's a ring of Asian men run by Asian men who are doing this, do you think that the sympathy isn't as heightened, or am I getting into a conversation that we just don't need to have right now? Because I can stop with this line of questioning.
No, I think it's a good line of questioning. I think all of those things that you suggested are right. I think if let's just flip the race here. If she was Indian or Pakistani and she made this accusation against a group of white men, I do not think, well, there certainly would have been like race-based violence against men and businesses in her community just because they were white. I can guarantee that, having never been to this town, but that's true in America. That would be true there.
Another question I have, and I want to wrap this up soon enough. I don't think there's much else to talk about it right now,
okay.
but they did speak of a rape allegation that Ellie made 6 months after leaving home. So this is definitely before, 2020.
Yeah.
We know the police were called in, but we hear nothing else about it. And then also we heard about the manager of the bar saying at one point that she ended up being very close to. She had worked there, I think, for the last 3 years, or since she was 16 maybe.
Yeah.
I had to go to the police, is what he said. But again, we don't know when or what happened, what the circumstances were leading up to that. I'm presuming they're going to go, like, that's all been teed up for further episodes. But I did find it weird that they spoke about those two things and didn't come back to them at all.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you about this because usually we start these by talking about the host or talking about the structure or the intro, and we didn't really do that here. But I'll say now, I feel like in general, my perception of the hosts and of the storytelling is that it's strong. Like it feels organized. It feels kind of tightly constructed. It's easy to follow. It's quick, right? This is only like a 30-minute episode.
Yeah. It feels kind of similar to Crossbow. Because
killer.
The way there was the two voices that you heard through quite a lot of it, and it was actually a male and female that we were hearing through a number of the episodes. And then also it was tight. It was 30 minutes long. They were BBC reporters, these are Sky News, so yeah, it definitely feels polished, but I don't feel like it feels like Dateline polished. It doesn't feel like dun dun dun.
No, it's not overly dramatic. Like
Mm.
it's a very dramatic story, and I don't
Yeah.
think it's kind of played up in that way. Like I feel like it's played straight in a I think a good way. Like I say that, and I started to say that to say before you cut me off.
I wasn't gonna.
Like I listened to this episode twice, and both times I finished it and I thought, oh, like from just like a journalistic perspective, this seems solid, this seems well researched. Like I appreciated the interviews with her mom, with her sister, with
Mm.
Brian was the name of the guy, the boss at her pub, her friend. Like we got all these nice interviews. I thought it was nicely put together, but also these things we've been talking about, like and I guess this is the reason we need to keep listening, but yeah, there are a lot of like really big questions, but also, and maybe to zoom out from the line of questioning we were going on before about kind of why are we sympathetic to her? Is she presented too sympathetically here? Like, is the kind of focus on her being like, from this nice suburb, and she was so bubbly and outgoing when she was younger? Like, would we have gotten that from a different story, right? Like, is it
I think it's a
presented?
good point. It feels kind of similar to first episodes when you're being introduced to the victim and you're getting the background of the victim and you're allowing the victim space to breathe before
Yes.
like the trauma of the rest of the story is unleashed. It's a really interesting point. I will say, I don't know if you noticed the host throughout, there's a few quips of like where he's coming in to kind of that spark of doubt.
Yeah.
Her sister mentioned at one point how walking home from the nightclub together one night, this man grabbed her outside of one of the takeaways, or a takeout, like a chipper. You guys don't have chippers here, like a late night
I know what you mean. Yeah, I'm with
place
you.
to go to grab food and eat it at the side of the road.
Context
Um,
clues. We're with you.
okay. And he said, "Did you see that?" And she said, "Yeah." And he was like, "Okay." And like then Brian would tell the story about. I have thoughts on this. Brian said like this group of Asian men came in, they walked to the back, they turn around, they walked back, didn't say anything. I'm like, maybe they were looking for a nice table. Like this feels like there's a real jump to conclusion here. And obviously she's like, it sounds like Ellie might have been laying the groundwork to say like they're not nice men kind of thing. So he throws them out and they play the race card and he's annoyed about that. And I was like, oh, there's so many thoughts I have here.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know the story fully yet. But it felt like throughout, I felt that the host was putting in quips and putting in all these different comments to tell us, like, there's no sympathy here. Like, we have the story.
I think
We're
that's right.
telling you what other people... Like, I wonder, are they trying to treat us like the people in the community were treated? They were treated to this innocent person that they got to know. This post goes out and they get enraged, and that's what they know first, and allowing us to have those feelings to try and mirror maybe what the community felt, and then maybe throughout the rest of the podcast we're going to learn the story as the community learned it.
I definitely want to come back to that in our recap, because if not, like if that's not the case, then I think I'll be real upset about it. If that is the case, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion of how they treat that, how they sort of pivot from her as this like sweet, innocent girl to the cause of all this destruction, right? And violence. So, all right, we'll come back to that in our recap.
Come here, are you eager to keep listening?
I definitely am. I'm curious about it. I think this is one where if this was like 12 episodes, I'd be like, oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I can take 12 episodes. It's so dark, right? Like this is a dark.
You say this so often. I'm like, we're in true crime land. Everything is dark. Like nothing is light.
I just keep waiting for that one about the puppies where everyone like finds a new home, like their forever home, and the crime
you
is
took
like...
you took a week off from recording this, and you spent your time watching Murder, She Wrote. So even in your week off, you're watching not true crime. Sorry.
I will say this, and we should talk about this because this is important and definitely needs to stay in this episode. So yes, we took a week off, and I watched approximately, let's see, 15 to 20 episodes of Murder, She Wrote. And each day we would come home from our adventures, and it turns out the Airbnb we're staying in had a channel that was just Murder, She Wrote. It was the Murder, She Wrote channel.
I need
And
that in my life.
yeah, it's pretty great. But so the first day we were there, it was season, I don't know what season. It was like season like 9 or something. It was late into the run of the show. And so we ended up seeing bits from the last few seasons of the show. And then we saw the very last movie, which actually I wanted to tell you was set in Ireland. She goes to Ireland because somebody dies and she's in the will, and Jessica Fletcher.
Oh yeah, I've seen this one.
Yeah, so it's a whole like Irish story. And that was the last movie that they ever did with the show, and then our last night there, it cycled back to the beginning. We got to see some early episodes, which was just great. So two things. One, because the show was primarily from the 80s and early 90s, the last movie came out in like 2003, but most of it was like 80s feeling, even though some of it was early 90s. It's so like sanitized and neat and bloodless most of the time that it was great. It was very much the opposite of this story we've been talking about. At the same time, Murder, She Wrote went to some real dark places and covered some real dark things. So I will admit that is true. But
I mean,
anyway.
you did. I'm just saying that was your choice.
It was half my choice. We should call that out. Yes. Anyway, all right. How eager are you to keep listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I'm eager. I've got so many feelings. I've so many questions. From a podcast point of view, not from like a story point of view, my vibes are good from the structure and the format and everything. I definitely have questions in terms of like how they're going to deal with Ellie as moving away from that kind of sympathetic view. I think that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm probably not overly, obviously excited is the wrong word. I'm not over like the idea of having to listen to like what the victims in this case had to go through, the men and the families that were targeted as a result of this.
Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to having to listen to that. That's one of the things I'm not looking forward to. But yeah, no, I think 6 episodes, it's going to be tight. It's going to be interesting to see how they lay it out, and I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of them.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not sure if any of you listened to the very start of this podcast, but just in case you didn't, we are in fact on Patreon, patreon.com/so much crime, so little time.
Check us out on Patreon. We really appreciate you supporting the show. You also get access to a bunch of content and other fun stuff. Check out the site to find out all the fun things. Also, before we get to our true crime question of the week, if you haven't yet, go on your podcast app, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to us, subscribe, give us a rating, 5 stars. We appreciate. We try to earn all of those stars. And thanks for listening.
True crime question of the week related to the story that we have just been told. Have you ever told a lie that then spun wildly out of control?
Yeah, so I did in high school. And so as you've brought up many times, this was a long time ago for me.
Back in the 80s.
It's the late 90s. I'm going to tell this story as I remember it. And I may have some of the details wrong. And in case anyone who listens to this was there at the time and I get something wrong, I apologize in advance. But the way I remember this going down was one day I was in my first period English class, senior in high school. And there were these 2 guys there in the class. And they asked me, just as like a moment where like the teacher was getting set up or something, they said, "Hey, are you working tonight?" And they knew that I worked at CVS, the drugstore. So they asked if I was working that night, and I said yes. And then whatever, the class went on. And then I think in the hallway between periods or something, at some point during the day, I ran into another guy who also worked at the same place. And we were just talking about like working that night. And I said, "Oh yeah, I think it'll be more interesting than usual," because usually it's kind of boring. Because I think these 2 guys from my English class are going to come in and rob the store.
And rob the store?
Yeah, and I don't remember why I said that. I don't remember where that came from. Maybe it was something they said. I just know that in that moment, I said that to this guy. His name was Mike. And what I didn't put together, because I was 17 or whatever, and not, my brain wasn't fully developed, was that he was going to turn around and do something with that information. So anyway, I forget all about this. I go through the rest of my school day. I go home. I get home, and I think I go to work at like 5, like I'm working like a 5 to 9 shift or something. And I get a call at home from the store manager. And she says, "Hey, we need you to come in right now." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And it's before my shift is supposed to start. And so I go in, and the police are there. And I have to go in and basically tell this police officer that no one is coming to rob the store tonight.
Oh, no.
And like the whole store was on like high alert, waiting for this robbery to happen. And yeah, and it was real embarrassing.
Did you keep your job?
I did.
And did your 2 friends from English class ever come in?
Well, so fun ending to the story. This was when I worked in the pharmacy in the back of the store. And they did come in. And they came in to buy condoms.
Oh, and that's why they wanted to know if you were working.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's how that story ends.
That's very funny.
All right, Dee. What do you got?
I can't think of one. I'm failing. What? I can't.
Do you never tell a lie?
No, I'm sure I've told plenty of lies, but I don't know of any that like spun wildly out of control. I do remember years ago, me and my friend went away with like her family, and we met a group of, there was 4 of us that ended up going away like on holiday, and then we met a group of guys from England, and we stayed in touch with them afterwards. And one of them messaged me one day and basically told me that he was really sick and he had like brain cancer or something. I don't know. Anyway, this went on for so long. Like, we'd be chatting in the evenings and I'd be checking in to see how he went, and he'd be telling me about his scans and this, that and the other. And after about a month or 2, he was like, "I actually am totally fine. Like, I'm not at all sick." And I was like, "Why would you make this up? Like, I'm in a different country. Like, there's like this, there just doesn't seem to be any benefit to me being here and thinking that you're sick."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's dark.
I think that's all I have.
I mean, that wasn't even you telling the lie.
I know. That was me being a martyr.
Wow. You really pulled like a me on that.
I know.
Yeah. All right.
It doesn't happen often, to be fair.
Well, I guess that's our true crime question of the week. Next time, we will recap all of Unreliable Witness.
What really happened leading up to the infamous Facebook post?
And what are the stories of the men that Ellie accused?
That's on the next So Much Crime,
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.